right, we're back. So hey, 3.4, we're almost done in the planning stage. We still have this, planning, business analysis, information management. I think this is the coolest because ultimately, like when you're discussing information, you're basically, that's when you get creative, right? That's when you start making these kind of like plots and how you're going to succeed and be triumphant. If it's not epic, why do it, right? And after that, basically, performance improvements. Performance improvements are basically a self-reflection, but a scientific approach to self-reflection. So that should be my favorite, but let's see. Let's see. I'm excited to see the information guide. What's the purpose of planning a business analysis information management? The purpose of a planned business analysis information management is to develop an approach of how business analysis information will be stored and accessed. Wow. Description. Business analysis information is comprised of all the information business analysts elicit, create, compile, and disseminate in the course of performing business analysis. It's a fuck ton of information, man. Imagine talking to stakeholders. Imagine doing research about previous case studies. Imagine doing research about the current market and the current company in the market and the current company culture and reading through documentations of the company. All of that is information, man. A lot of reading, man. It's fine. Models, scope, statements, stakeholder concerns, elicitation results, requirements, designs, solution options that are just a few examples. Notice a few. This includes requirements and designs from lightweight user stories to formal requirement documentation to functioning prototypes. Ultimately, like everything we do is basically we're gonna have to thread it in a way for it to make sense for everything, everyone, and our project. So information management entails identifying what are the things we're identifying, how information should be organized. Makes sense. The level of detail at which information should be captured, depending on the information, naturally. Any relationships between the information. Exactly. If these information, if changes in certain information affect others or no. How information may be used across multiple initiatives and throughout the enterprise. Yeah, you dictate. That's you basically saying like this information is useful for A, B, C, D, and E. What's the point of it if it's not going to be used anywhere? How information should be accessed and stored also makes sense because like the first thing that came to mind is some people would need access to this information and some people would have privileged access to this information. That's kind of like a thing. Characteristics about the information that must be maintained. Exactly, like characteristics of the information. I like that because all information kind of like has its own. Here they're characterizing it. I don't know if I don't think they're gonna mention it. Maybe they'll mention it somewhere else because I think at some point we're going to basically be we, we're going to basically be. I think in the strategy analysis we probably will dive into more information. I'm not sure. Requirements lifecycle? No. I don't know, man. Information somewhere, man. It's characterizing information. It's interesting to me. I have no clue what these words actually would look like. How would you see it? How would you be characterizing information? Granted, like we're checking on a lot of details when it comes to this information, but ultimately, like characterizing this information. I don't know. Information management helps ensure that business analysis information is organized in a functional and useful manner, is really accessible to appropriate personnel, and is stored for the necessary length of time. Great. What are the inputs we need? We need inputs from the business analysis approach. It was mentioned before. If you remember the charts literally tell us where inputs are coming from and where it's going. And we want inputs from the stakeholder engagement as well, and from the governance approach. Do you want me to read these? Why the fuck not? From the business analysis approach, incorporating the overall business analysis approach to the information management approach is necessary to ensure consistency. All right. right, and this defines how business analysts manage changes with the governance approach. All right, because the governance approach is all about change and authority and who says who and who has the right to what. Stakeholder engagement identifies the stakeholders and then basically gives us a chance to, we're getting information from somewhere, right? So stakeholders are importante. Now, this is the chart. Notice the input comes from business analysis, stakeholder engagement, and governance approach. Guidelines and tools, exact same shit we did before for every single one of them. Business analysis performance assessment, which is based on research, business policies, which is based on the business itself, information management tools, which are based on like, what are information management? Maybe I'll Google that. If you can't see what I'm doing, I'm Googling types of information management tools. I don't know why this shit's in Arabic. It's fine though. Here we are. Remind me later. Can you guys see? You can't. Why though? All right, never mind. There are paper form and technology. So like information management tools are basically softwares, certain techniques, shit like this. All right, worth the Google research. Worth the Google search. So after this, you have the past. All of these fall under the business analysis, information management, legal regulatory information, and then basically the output is an information management approach, which will be used to communicate business analysis information, to trace requirements, to maintain requirements, and define requirements. Oof, information is key to requirements. Haha. What are the elements? Organization of business analysis information. We have to organize the information. Business analysts are responsible for organizing business analysis information in a manner that allows for efficient access and use. What's the point of organization if it's not going to be efficient? Information must be well structured to ensure it's not difficult to locate. Organization structure conflicts with other information or is needless to be duplicated. Basically, like, part of our information gathering is going to be messy, but the plan is basically to kind of like sort them out. The business analyst determines how to best structure and organize the business analysis information at the start of an initiative. This involves taking into consideration the type and amount of information to be collected, the stakeholders' access and usage needs, the size and complexity of the change, relationships among the types of information must be defined to assist managing the effect of new changed information in the future. All right. So this is where like this basically is the highlight of how business analysts actually like contribute to this baby. Why isn't it doing what it does normally? So this is where business analysts basically the badasses of this world kind of like take into effect because we're the ones making the decisions here and making the plan. Level of abstraction. Level of abstraction describes the breadth and depth of the information being provided. It's like a summary of some sort that kind of like creates a story of what the information does and how the information works. Representation of information may range from highly conceptual, summarized, to very detailed. You can use charts, you can use all kinds of shit. Determining how much detail each stakeholder may require as initiative evolves. Consideration is given to the needs of the stakeholders, the complexity of what is being explained, and the importance of the change, right? All of these are the details that you have to kind of like, that information does this, that's why we need it, and all that good stuff. Rather than present the same information to all stakeholders, business analysts should present information with appropriate breadth and level of detail on each stakeholder's role. That's why when you're planning business analysis governance, basically you kind of like find this one does this one does this, especially when it comes to stakeholders. What effectively you're doing is you're kind of like preparing the setup for when time comes for you to start sharing information. You kind of like know who to share what for, and again, like some information is privileged and some information is necessary to people. Business analysis information regarding the topic of significant importance or high level of risk is frequently represented in greater detail. Depends on who you're presenting to, naturally. Sometimes the CEO is the type of guy, like I read a book once, it's called Surrounded by Idiots. And he discusses like four colors of people, basically red, green, yellow, and blue. And the blue type is very analytical, which means like these are people that enjoy documentation, that like to understand all the details of things and all these kinds of things. So some people, some CEOs want to know all the details and take the paper home and take it's peaceful for them to kind of like read what's going on. While other people just want them to be told like this is what's going on, thank you very much. One simple email does the trick. Traceability approach is based on the complexity of the domain, the number of views of requirements that will be produced. Number of views of requirements that will be produced, as in like, you know, that means that when you're doing requirements, you have to take into consideration how other people might see them. So requirements are the same, but you have to present them differently, maybe. Any requirement-related risks, organizational standards, applicable regulatory requirements, and an understanding of the cost and benefits involved with tracing. When we're tracing information as well, we have to keep in mind, basically, is it worth tracing or not? How much would it cost us? Blah, 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 blah. How many people would actually like be involved in this requirement? Would they require like that much detail? Business analysts plan to ensure the approach is at a level of detail to add value without excessive overhead. And that excessive overhead is key here because sometimes you tend to overdo it. So like that eventually gets misconstrued as a waste of resources. That ends up in being a waste of resources, waste of time, and basically just waste of energy. The plan for requirements reuse, just in case. Reusing requirements can save an organization time, effort, and cost, provided the requirements are accessible and structured in a manner that supports their reuse. Remember, what we're doing is actually like super at the core of the organization to a point where they might in the future want to use them again. So like our job, we give them everything. Requirements that are potential candidates for long-term use are those an organization must meet on an ongoing basis, such as regulatory requirements, contractual obligations. Like here, basically, we're gonna yeah, so like these kinds of information, like quality standards, service level agreements, business rules, business processes. Like I want you to imagine like a document that's 500 pages, but you only want to read like page 300 to 350, right? So like, you know, how we organize them makes sense. And basically these are standards. These are kind of like future policies could be made around them because like your research basically extracted something core from how business is being done. So this is us basically considering the people we're working with and how we could actually impact their work in the future without us actually like being there all the fucking time. Requirements may also be reused when describing common features or services that are used across multiple systems. Basically, part of our research as well can actually like point out where we can actually do them, other than the project that you're working on, where they can be implemented. Because you're already talking to various stakeholders, but maybe the change you want to do is in one place, but you need these stakeholders. So, but whatever you produce could actually be used by other stakeholders. So who the fuck knows? To make requirements useful beyond the current change, business analysts plan ahead of required. See, I told you this before I even read it. For requirements reuse by identifying how to best structure, store, and access requirements so they are usable, accessible for future business analysis efforts. You see, we're only at chapter 3. And in a way, I did take a course. But no, in a way, our way of thinking has already expanded and started kind of like building something on a different note. So in order for requirements to be reused, they must be clearly named, defined, and stored in a repository that is available for other business analysts. Also, like, see here, they added another other people basically. I was thinking just company, but like, what if they have a different project they want to work on in the future? These are also things, any research previously is a good research in order for us to kind of like, could be reused. So business analysis information can be stored in many ways. Storage decisions depend on how many factors. Assume what are storage decisions? Software, bindings, all kinds of stuff. What conditions must be presented for access? Organizational standards and tool availability also influence storage and access decisions. The business, see it? Like how you actually like store them might influence depending on where. Like maybe like for some departments you would create like some templates for them to kind of quickly use because they would not want to access that like the information online or something like this. I'm assuming if there's a warehouse, so if you have something for the warehouse people, the last thing you want is for them to kind of like go check on a computer because they're doing physical labor, I guess. Right? Like depending on who you're working with and what your stakeholders are. The repository may need to store information other than requirements and designs. It should be able to indicate the status of any stored information or allow for modification of that information over time. So that's us just diving into more detail and kind of creating the whole, like, if something changes, the way we're storing them shows that this has changed in order for people to learn from it as well, right? Requirements attributes. Requirements attributes provide information about requirements and aid in the ongoing management of the requirements throughout the change. They are planned for and determined with the requirements themselves. Requirements attributes allow business analysts to associate information with individual or related groups of requirements. Okay, so basically the attributes of the actual like requirements are basically what are the attributes of the requirements? Okay, so some commonly used requirement attributes includes absolute reference, author, complexity, ownership, priority. All right, so that's basically us kind of like tagging things, right? Let's use Facebook as an example, tagging things into other stuff. Absolute reference provide a unique identifier, which basically is like warehouse storage. It could also be like time. It could also be based on project. It could be based on product. We don't know. And basically, the reference is not altered or reused if the requirement is moved, changed, or deleted. So this is something that's absolute. That's why they call it absolute reference. Author provides the name of the person who needs to be consulted or should the requirement later be found to be ambiguous, unclear, or in conflict. So that kind of like creates a documentation of like where to go in case something happens. A verification of sort, like, why does this matter? Oh, because this guy did this research to get to this point. Complexity indicates how difficult the requirement will be to implement. Ownership, the individual or group that needs the requirement or will be business, right? Like we were discussing warehouses, different than accounting, different than I don't know what. Priority indicates relative importance of requirements depending on what you're doing. Like sometimes these requirements are necessary to be taken care of first or something like this. Risks identified on certain events or may impact requirements. Source identifies the origin of the requirement. See, okay, so this is basically like where it came from. Stability indicates the maturity of the requirement, like is it something that we were doing in a sustainable way or that proved itself over and over again? Status indicates the state of the requirement, whether it's proposed, accepted, verified, postponed, cancelled, or implemented. Urgency indicates how soon the requirement is needed. This is actually only necessary to specify this separately from the priority when the deadline exists for implementation. So basically part of our documentation for these kinds of, for information is to kind of like create the requirements and basically uh, I'm imagining it as a map, kind of like, these are the things that you could look into, and there's specific like these are the tags, like, this is urgent because of this and this reason, and this could be spent for later, and this has a time limit on it, and this has to be done before. Like, imagine markets, right? Imagine markets like, seasonal. Some markets are seasonal, and if you're doing research, basically plan for the season. Guidelines and tools, business analysis, performance assessments, basically, they're same things, man. Business policies, information management tools, and legal regulatory information. Performance assessment provides results for previous assessments that should be reviewed or incorporated into the planning approaches, whether it's done by the company itself or whether it's done by a similar company somewhere where you can actually like find out the case studies. Techniques. Brainstorming used to help stakeholder brainstorming techniques, interviews, item tracking, lessons learned, mind mapping. Mind mapping is how I was actually thinking of the actual requirements. Because ultimately the mind mapping is you kind of like connecting your thoughts together and where they came from and kind of like creating a visual map in order for you to elaborate more on them and to kind of like see how they're connected to each other. It very much helps in like you organizing the shit in your mind. Process modeling used to document the process or method for managing the actual business analysis information. That's you basically like following through and saying this is how we're doing this and this is how we're doing this, and then eventually reflecting on it and going like, this needs this, this needs this. A survey or questionnaire, again, like to ask stakeholders to provide input into defining business analysis, and workshops used to uncover business analysis and information management needs in a group setting. I'm gonna check if this was copy pasted. 1 second. Dot, open link in new tab, go to this. Come on, man. Techniques. No, they're not copy pasted. They actually like see here, workshops used to uncover business analysis and information management needs in a group setting. Here used to identify possible decision making, change control approval. Okay, I'm actually like pretty proud of these guys, man. I figured they'd copy paste this shit. But it shows you that like everything you do, the information you get all depends on where you're gonna use it and what's the point of it. And that's basically like a workshop in this case is different than a workshop on a planned analysis governance. Because here you kind of like see what the information management needs in the group setting and stuff like this. What are the stakeholders? The main subject matter experts, just like always, because you may need to access and work with business analysis information and will be interested in a more specific view of business analysis information which relates to their area of expertise. So basically, a stakeholder in this setting would allow you to kind of like design information for their needs in order for them to have an easier time. Regulator may define rules and processes related to information management. Like they might have a certain way to actually like go forward for the information. And sponsors reviews, comments on, approves business analysis information. Edits. The sponsor basically edits and kind of like looks at things in a certain kind of way. This is how I want this information. This is how we don't want it. And outputs. Information management approach includes the defined approach for how business analysis information will be stored, accessed, and utilized during the change and after the change is complete. And there we go. 3.4 is done. And next is identifying business analysis performance improvements. Look at that. I'll see you on the next one, babies.